So welcome to the first edition of The Grateful View. I want to start by saying thank you so much for coming, hearing the call of my invitation, and showing up. Thank you, Trent, for showing up. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. I just want to set the context of why we're all here. For me, I was in New Zealand 2 months ago, or 2.5 months ago, and I was there for a healthy living conference, and I was giving a talk on sacred commerce, and I kind of went there thinking I was just going to give something. And I didn't realize that I was actually going to stumble across something that so profoundly impacted me that really it's become the mission of my life. And when I came across a speaker who you're going to get to see today, Graeme, and when I saw him speak, as a human being, I knew that, it's like in every moment I'm trying to figure out what my purpose is. What really is this life about? What am I really doing here? And I know that what I'm doing is awakening the presence of love, but I'm always looking at what action is that going to take? And, and what mission am I going to be up to with this presence of love that I feel in my heart, that I want to extend, that I want to give? And so when I saw this man speak, and really deliver a profound solution for the crisis that we're faced with, I really got, wow, as a human being right here on planet Earth right now, there's nothing more important than illuminating and awakening this message. And when I came back from my trip and I was telling everybody, oh, you got to look up this guy, Graeme, he's amazing. And I looked on YouTube, and 144 people had seen him speak on YouTube. That was his big views on YouTube. And I was just like, this is insane. This is one of the most profound, important human beings on planet Earth, and 144 people have looked at him on YouTube. And so in that moment, it became my personal mission that I was going to give his message wings and communicate to the people, my networks, the importance of this message. And so I set that intention, and 2.5 months later, just happened to be that he was coming to the United States, and I asked him to come here and give this talk to you. And really, I'm just super, super profoundly grateful that I get to be an ambassador of such an important message in my heart. So thank you so much for coming. Welcome, Graeme.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Thank you, Roland. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the CEO of an Australian company called Nutritech Solutions. The company came about with a life-changing scenario where my young 6-year-old daughter was hit by a four-wheel drive at 100 kilometres an hour outside of a school and horrifically damaged. She died 3 times on the way to hospital, and she spent 3 months in a coma. And because she was an organ donor, it was a daily thing that we said, look, there's someone waiting on a rise and someone waiting on other harvestable organs. Can we turn off the machines? And I insisted that it wasn't to happen, but they pointed out she would be a vegetable and she would never talk and speak and have any quality of life if she survived, which was highly unlikely. Things got worse and worse over that period till a day arrived when really there was no chance in terms of what the machines were doing and the pressure that was building on her brain. And I prayed and I said, if she survives, I'll do something worthwhile. And an hour later she came out of the coma, so it was an amazing emotional scenario. And I had a sleepless night that night deciding what I would do with this promise, and had a recognition that we are very much what we eat, and what we eat comes from the soil, and that most people don't recognise that very simple fact. In fact, it's profound how many people have got no grip of where their food comes from, and how their health is dependent upon that food. So I decided that I would become, and I've got degrees in psychology and sociology, that I would become a world nutrition expert on soil health, animal health, human health, microbe health, and planetary health. So I set about doing that. Now, I'd been a successful businessman. There was no monetary motivation to do anything like this because I'd had all the money that anyone could spend in a lifetime. I'd been, I think, a tremendous father at that point, but I'd never given anything to anyone. We talk about selfless service and the importance of selfless service. I'd never given to a charity. I'd been, as I say, an amazing father, created a tremendous, memorable childhood for my 3 children, but never get anything back. So I decided that I'd been an A student at varsity. I've got a very, very good memory, as you'll see. And I decided that this was the most important thing that I could do with the rest of my life. So my brother came to visit my daughter at the hospital the following day, and I said, this is what I'm doing with the rest of my life. He said, I want to be in it too. We went down and formed the company, and that was 18 years ago. And we're now in 44 countries spreading this message, even though I might only have whatever you mentioned on YouTube. I speak to about 80 or 100,000 people a year, and we've made some tremendous changes around the world. I've gone to South Africa and conducted 2 of my 4-day courses each year for the last 12 years. South Africa is now the world leader in this approach. The Woolworths chain in South Africa, 360 stores, in last November adopted what's called the Farming for the Future initiative, where all the food produced in 360 stores is grown with a biological approach with no chemicals, unbelievable flavour, nutrient density, shelf life, and medicinal qualities for those 47 million people in South Africa. The fascinating, thanks. The fascinating thing about your country, and of course, if we start talking about your contribution to this massive drama that we're all facing in relation to climate change, it is fairly major, as I've no doubt you're aware. I mean, 20% of the world's population, 5% of the world's population you represent, and you're producing slightly over 20% of the CO2. But in your favour, in recent months, there's been something that has amazed me, and it really does feel like 2013 is the year of change that we all hope for. The world's largest food producers, the Dole Corporation, an American company with thousands of farms and thousands of farms that supply them. I worked with a farmer online that just appealed to me, just liked where he was coming from. He never mentioned he was a Dole manager, as it turned out he was, and I helped him produce the largest and most nutrient dense and minimal chemical input crop of strawberries that Dole had ever seen, because, as I said, I didn't know. It was only at the end he said, oh, actually, I'm a Dole manager. And so Dole sent one of their scientists over to do my 4-day course. Then they brought me over to train a bunch of scientists and farm managers. And at the end of those 2 days, which was last September, they announced that they have just received the edict from above that the entire organisation is to begin a conversion to biological agriculture. So it's a huge, massive, phenomenal change. And hopefully you'll see at the end of this talk why that's so important. And what I'm going to do in this initial stage is I want to road test a little. I've got to do a presentation for TED.com. And I'm going to road test something that's actually a little rough. I've got to so I'm going to do my 18 minutes, and then we'll go into the presentation as whole, and I'll flesh out a lot of the ideas. There will be, and I might jump a few slides because I'm assuming that most of you are well and truly city. Who's got a veggie garden? Yeah, well, there's 3. So, it's going to be sort of almost foreign language stuff, some of the soil stuff, and I might just brush over it and give you a general feeling for the concept. There's a lot of things about extending longevity, about a whole range of really valuable health tips. There's a lot of philosophical things. There's a lot of things of interest outside of whether or not you actually grow your own food. But hopefully some more of you will feel a little more motivated to begin producing your own food. I argue rather passionately that the home garden is the ultimate wellness tool. There is nothing better than having your own home garden, to be able to grow that food when you know how to do it and to produce this amazing nutrient density. The founder of modern medicine, Hippocrates, made that often repeated cliche, let your food be your medicine and your medicine be your food. And a great deal of what we're calling food at the moment and its medicinal qualities are not what it used to be. I mean, what you eat comes from the soil, and the soil is a shadow of what it formerly was. And it's really quite a basic and simple thing to correct that, and to not just eat this food that's been grown with this amazing flavour, forgotten flavours and so forth, but to be able to pick it rather than having it been harvested and losing its whole, quite a large percentage of its vitamin content and so forth, and transport and early harvest because you want to store it for longer and so forth. To be able to walk out usually directly before you eat it. If you take something basic like corn, for example, Corn loses 40% of its nutrition within 25 minutes of picking it. So you won't believe if you boil some salty water and put some corn cobs directly from your garden into that pot what corn really tastes like when it has its full nutritional component. So there is nothing more valuable than having your own vegetable garden, and you can do that in raised beds, you can do that on balconies, and hopefully some of you will feel a little more motivated to do that when we finish this talk. So as I said, we've developed some 200 products. Dole is now considering to become our not considering, they're midway and becoming our US distributors for the agricultural range, but there is a whole human health range, and there's also home garden ranges and so forth. We've got the world's largest sustainable website. We've sort of become a world leader in the kind of problem-solving strategies in all forms of horticulture and agriculture. So this is a little TED presentation. It's called Healthy Soils, Hardy People, Happy Planet. And I should use my timer to see if I can pull it off in 18 minutes, which is when you talk for days on end. I literally speak for 4 and 5 days non-stop to get this full-scale message across. So this is 18 minutes. It's going to be quick. Basically, this relationship between the soil, the planet, the people and the planet is the most important understanding at this particular time, without a doubt, and I have no doubt that you'll share my opinion. And it's a relationship that's been largely ignored. The soil is what determines our health, as I've mentioned, and hugely linked to planetary health. And as I said, our soils are a shadow of what they used to be. So the link, of course, we'll talk about it as we move through, we won't spend time on that. What we're seeing, of course, we've got teams of agronomists and we're testing soils in 44 countries, and so we have a good insight into where our soils are at, and essentially we've mined those soils. Every time you take some food from a soil, the first cell that oozed from the Precambrian ocean contains 74 minerals, and they're all there in a specific balance for a purpose. And we've focused upon 12 or 14 minerals in agriculture, and for a long time we only focused upon 3 minerals. A German chemist called Justus von Liebig burnt some plant material, analysed the ash with the rather crude tools that they had at that point, said, gee, it's made mainly of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, and announced to the world that we had a whole bunch of armaments factories that were free at the time. We can produce this thing, and we can supply these synthetic versions of those 3 minerals. And for decades, that's all we did. Every time you take food off, you remove a little bit of all 74 minerals, we put back just 3. We tested for 3, and sometimes calcium and magnesium, for decades and decades and decades, and we mined horrifically those soils, to the point that nutritionists, the good nutritionists that understand the equation, are now suggesting that the food we're consuming contains about 20% of the nutrition that was found in the food consumed by our grandparents when they were children. So we lost 80% in 3 generations, which is a horror show. And the outcome of that horror loss of nutrition, and it's not just about soils, of course, it's not just about what we lost in the soils, it's about how we processed our food, how, for example, in Australia, 9 out of 10 loaves of bread are white loaves of bread, and when you take wholemeal flour and convert it to white flour, you lose 85% of everything, and what you've technically created at that point, and 9 out of 10 school children are going off to bed to school with their white sandwich, what you've technically created is something called an anti-nutrient. The most energy-intensive process in the human body is digestion, and by the time you've digested something with 85% of its nutrition missing, the minerals and nutrients involved in firing digestion actually result in a net loss to the consumer of the white bread sandwich. And we can't really have children losing nutrition when this is the first time in human history where we're actually expected to outlive our children. That's never happened, ever. If we talk about degeneration and the phenomenon of degeneration, generation after generation, there are some very, very obvious things. You might, for example, we talk about degeneration in children, that cumulative effect. When I was a child in New Zealand, I'm born in New Zealand, we had 1 child in the classroom with glasses, for example. We had 1 child in the school with braces, and they both got pretty ordinary nicknames as a result of it. The reality is now that 1 out of 3 children's wearing glasses, and 2 out of 3 have either got braces or need them. And the braces are a real simple one. The braces is just simply that your jaw didn't develop to fit your teeth. It didn't have the nutrition required to fill out to the size that it should have filled to evenly space your teeth in your mouth. So the nutrition story is a huge one, and the link between nutrition and soil is massive. What we're going to talk about in this initial little 80-minute presentation, we've already gone way over time, I'm supposed to spend 30 seconds a slide. We're going to talk about carbon, we're going to talk about something called humus. Now, who's heard and understands what humus is? Oh, that's good. We've got humus is decayed organic matter that's formed into a kind of amorphous, stable form that effectively holds that carbon that otherwise... First of all, we've got to understand carbon. So we're talking about there's only ever been the same number of carbon molecules on the planet. So the carbon's either stored in the soil as humus, or it's stored in the biomass, all the plants on the planet. Trees obviously with their very carbon-dense trunk can hold it for some time in that form, or it's stored in the atmosphere, and we've got what's called the carbon cycle that recycles the carbon between those three sources. Now, the story with our soils is that we've lost slightly over two-thirds of our humus, and if we do the sums on that equation, that's the fascinating part. If we do the sums, what that two-thirds actually translates to, and there's been some very good research that's quantified these figures, 476 gigatons of CO2 that used to be humus in the soil is now CO2 in the atmosphere, and of course playing a major role. During that period of extractive agriculture, actually since 1860, with all of mankind's other enterprises, everything that we've done, this is burning coal-fired power stations, this is millions of motor vehicles, 6 billion lungs breathing out CO2 industry, the whole story, 250 gigatons. 476 from the soil, that used to be humus in the soil, now in the atmosphere, 250 from everything else. Now, we know from ice core sampling, and it's a fascinating story when you look at the research on ice core sampling. So we've gone down, you're digging back in time, you're drilling back into time into the ice, because the ice captured the 3 greenhouse gases that were present in the atmosphere at the time the ice was formed. So we've actually gone back 600,000 years at this point. And what we've seen is a remarkable evidence of James Lovelock's theory that he calls Gaia, the concept of the Earth as an organism. What we're seeing is this Earth breathing, literally every 100,000 years, for 600,000 years, all 3 greenhouse gases have risen directly in sync. There's not even a fraction of a millimetre between them. The 3 rise, they peak, and they fall like the Earth breathing for 600,000 years. And for those that say, the naysayers that say climate change is not happening, it's cyclical, they're right. It is cyclical. We're right at the peak of 100,000 year peak. But we know without doubt that every other time we peaked at 280 parts per million, at this point we're at 392.5 parts per million, and that's never happened before. Most of that came in the post-war party, fueled by cheap oil, and of course it took us till 1900 to get 1 billion people, and we're now close to 7 billion. And that footprint has been a major contributor. And not a small part of that footprint has come from the soil and our mismanagement of the soil in terms of losing that humus that was stored stable, that's now CO2 in the atmosphere causing the problem. Now let's do the sums. And this wasn't done in the Do the Maths tour that Bill did recently. The sums are that 4 gigatons equals 1 part per million. So just do the sums. So now divide 4 into 476 gigatons, and what do you get? You actually get the offending 110 plus parts per million of carbon that's in the atmosphere. Most of what's there came from the soil, and the way to change the equation, because what we're locked into currently, I've just finished for this presentation a couple of weeks of research of updating. I've talked agriculture's role in the whole climate change story all over the world. I was in China recently, speaking to the South China Agriculture College, 30,000 students studying biological agriculture. The Chinese do know the direction that we're heading. I'll just have a mouthful of water here. I suppose I should stick to my slides a little here. But so the equation, as I mentioned, when you do the sums, the story is about humus and our loss of humus, and we're going to talk in these slides about how we can change things. Despite huge increases, the increase in global chemical use with this, what I call bankrupt system, this current production system for food, the food that you're all eating, We apply more chemical fertilisers every year, and it rises quite dramatically. And we intervene with chemicals in terms of fungicides, pesticides, herbicides, and nematicides at increasing rates. In fact, if you analyse that whole story, since we started this experiment, as I call modern agriculture, some 10 or 12 decades ago, every year without exception, we've put more chemicals onto our soils and food, and every year without exception, we've had more pest and disease pressure. There is nothing that's the definition of unsustainable. And how's that impacted us? Well, one of the most graphic impacts, the success of any society, historically has been, okay, what do the next generation inherit from this experiment in this case? Well, no one looked. No one looked to see how these residues, for example, until recently, are impacting our children. There's very small pieces of research starting to surface. One of those, which I kept at the time, didn't keep the reference for it, and it's disappeared, and I don't know where it's gone to and why, but that study involved 1,400 school children in your country, and it looked at the 13 most commonly used farm chemicals and the presence of those chemicals in the 1,400 school children. So we're talking fungicides, pesticides, herbicides, a wormicide that's used commonly in cattle production, and nematicides. To the horror of the researchers, they couldn't find one child of 1,400, whether they were from urban or rural areas, who didn't have unacceptable levels of all 13 farm chemicals according to FDA standards in their tissues. Our largest killer of children, it's a new disease, is leukemia, by far the largest killer of children. There's the leukemia award in every city. There is no doubts about the root cause of leukemia. It's environmental chemicals, not just residues on your food, but environmental chemicals generally. And unfortunately, your house is one of the most toxic issues in that regard. But back to the chemicals on food story. The story of humus, and humus in terms of its relationship to that use of chemicals. The chemicals have seriously impacted that growing increase, 14% increase in toxic chemicals in 1 year last year, the biggest increase ever. I mean, it's a hiding to nothing. We are poisoning our children, we poison our soils, and most importantly, we are poisoning the organisms that are most responsible for saving the day. Now, the most important single creature on the planet at this point in time is a creature called mycorrhizal fungi. Now, who's ever heard of mycorrhizal fungi before? Good, there's 3 or 4 of you have. Mycorrhizal fungi are a creature that burrows into the plant root and extends out and gives a 10-fold increase in surface area of plant root, and it delivers all sorts of nutrients and holds moisture and protects the plant from disease. It's an amazingly important creature. There are just 10% of what there used to be some 5 decades ago of mycorrhizal fungi left now. So we lost 90% of them. Why is that important? Dr. Sarah Wright in 1996 discovered a substance called glomelin that's produced by the most abundant range of mycorrhizal fungi called the glomelis group. And this sticky carbon-based substance is, of course, a carbon in its own right and a stable form of carbon. But since the discovery of that particular substance, subsequent research has shown that that is a triggering mechanism. Glomelin is the triggering mechanism for one third of all the humus in the soil. Understand the relevance of it, because whatever we're in the soil we haven't got in the atmosphere. And when we look at that decline in humus in the soil, it directly matches the decline in mycorrhizal fungi. And mycorrhizal fungi can be reintroduced, but you've got to change some of your practice so you don't simply kill them off again. Massive range of benefits, but being responsible for 1/3, they are really one of the creatures that are hugely important and hugely responsible for saving the day. And we need to understand some of these very basic facts, as I'll point out as we move through. So when we talk about nutrition, we're talking about a 2-step process. And that nutrition applies to the soil equally, because you've got a very, very similar situation in your own gut. Your 30-foot tube that runs from your mouth to your anus should contain 100 trillion, not billion, 100 trillion microorganisms. That's 10 times more than the total number of cells in your body. That's 2 kilos of bugs living in your gut. And when you analyse the phenomenal role of those creatures, you find that they are hugely, hugely important in every aspect of your health. In fact, whether or not you become a grim statistic, when I talk grim statistics, I'm talking 1 in 2 of you guys currently succumbing to cancer. That's your figures, if you're not aware of it. one of the not succumbing but getting cancer, possibly getting rid of it, but getting cancer in your lifetime, 1 in 2, 10 years, 1 in 1. Now that's a plague disease. The great plague, as they call it, killed 1 in 4 people. We're now talking about cancer at 1 in 1. We're talking about diabetes. 1 in 3 Americans are pre-diabetic. It's called the coming plague. We're talking about Alzheimer's. 1 in 4 over 65 now succumbing to this new disease, Alzheimer's. We're talking about heart disease discovered in 1908. 1 in 2.9 people not getting it but dying from it. The largest killer on the planet, with cancer breathing very closely down its neck. So we are talking about serious issues, and your chances of surviving those things really, if you get really cold about analysing that, it's about your immune system. And if you look at this role of these 100 trillion organisms, you'll find that 85% of your immune system is located in the gut, because it's totally dependent upon this whole system. And those organisms, those 100 trillion organisms, do almost exactly what the organisms that crowd around the plant root do. Now the plant photosynthesizes. Now understand this, we're talking about the single most important process on the planet. There is nothing more important. There is only one food source. You can say, I eat meat, well the meat eats grass. There is only the green plant, and the green plant produces food on the basis of all carbon chemistry through this miraculous process, the most important process on the planet, where sunlight, water and carbon dioxide are combined together, and these little factories called chloroplasts in the green pigment of the plant produce glucose, which is the building block of all carbon chemistry. You, sitting here, come from that glucose building block. And the plant, in what is something of a universal law, the concept of give and you shall receive, the plant gives away a third of that glucose that it produced. Every night, beginning at about 4:45, the plant pumps down half of the glucose that it made in its little sugar factories during the day. And some of that is for the roots, because they require glucose for every function, and some of that, in fact 30% of the total, oozes out from the plant roots to feed the microorganisms. The plant knows the deal. Give and you shall receive. And what you receive back is exactly the same kind of deal as us and the organisms who are living in our gut, looking after their hosts, which is us. And us looking after them by not bombing them with a bunch of things, including McDonald's burgers. And when I say McDonald's burgers, the reason I do that, I'll just digress for a second. I run a health conference called Radiance that last year attracted 15,000 people. I had speakers for 6 days, 16 speakers from all over the globe, and it's the 8th time we've run that. One of the speakers is a specialist in food additives. And I'd heard this and thought it was one of those urban myths, but he had a McDonald's patty in a little carton that he carried around in the boot of his car in South Australia, where temperatures in this summer were 42, 43 degrees. It was 1 month short of 3 years, and he handed it around a group of 800 people, and they passed it along, and it looked like you pulled it out of the burger yesterday. There was no smell. It smelt that weird smell that those burger patties have, filled with massive amounts of preservative. Why you'd put that much in to maintain that in mincemeat for 3 years is beyond comprehension. But of course, what does that do to your gut? What does it do to your gut when you put that level of preservatives? I mean, when we talk about how we've compromised that life within and what impact it's had, particularly on our immunity, which determines whether or not we become a grim statistic, most people understand the basic concept of antibiotics, that they're indiscriminate, that many doctors are now saying that they, despite the lives they've saved, they're actually an incredibly destructive drug, amongst the most destructive. The new research, I had a professor in probiotics speak at my second to last conference. He pointed out a single dose of antibiotics actually takes 6 months of daily probiotic supplementation just to get back the counts that you started with. Whoever did that? Not many of us. So what we see is this, as I mentioned, this direct parallel, and we've bombarded. The thing that most people haven't sort of thought through is, you know, how do we get those football field-sized stadiums full of food lined up in the form of supermarkets? That's not how food used to be sold. I mean, food lasts for a week or two unless you salted it or dried it or whatever. What changed? Who can tell me what changed to allow mass marketing of food that lasts for 2 years on the shelf? Food stabilizers, and it's a nice sounding word, food stabilizers. Food stabilizers are chemicals that are biocides. Food stabilizers kill single-cell microorganisms. That's what lives in your gut. You've got 100 trillion single-celled organisms. Why would the food stop eating when it hits your mouth? Of course it doesn't. And if you're eating something like a McDonald's patty with that level of preservatives in it, as the undertakers are saying, they don't need much preservative now. People are pretty preserved. It's a major issue, and when you understand the role of these organisms, and then you see what we've done to the organisms in the soil, and understand that nutrient uptake, that nutrition is a two-phase process. For us, it's a two-phase process. It's what you eat, and it's whether or not that food digests, whether you've got those organisms working for you to deliver all of those multiple benefits. And they don't just digest food, they do all the same sorts of things. They produce a whole range, a whole suite of biochemicals to support us. Specifically, they're looking after their host, just as the organisms beneath the plant root who get their daily feed of sugar produce a whole spectrum of things to look after their host. And we take them out of the equation, we have to look after their host with chemicals, and that's what we've done. And the central measure of having taken that life force out of the equation in the soil is humus, because that's what they live in. They created it, it's their home base. The lower your humus, the less biological activity you've got, and the more chemicals you're going to have to use. And that relationship is really, really profound. The National Bank in Australia recently said, okay, we're lending money. The central mantra in agriculture is get bigger or get out. We're lending all these farmers money to buy their neighbours' farms, and those loans are falling over at an insane rate. We need to revalue all the criteria that determine the likely success when you buy your neighbour's farm. And so they had 3 years on 800 farms with the CSIRO, our national research body, and a couple of other organisations involved. And to the amazement of everyone, at the end of those 3 years, they discovered that the single, and it was head and shoulders above the next thing down, the single, it wasn't about how big your tractor it wasn't whether you mismanaged your book, it was about how much humus you had in the soil. It was that important that they actually put a price on soil based on every 0.15%. So if one soil had a 1.1% humus in the soil, or organic matter as it's called on a soil test, then something with a 1.25 was worth $1,000 an acre more, and that's what more money you were likely to make from it, because humus determines so much in the equation. Humus is where the organisms who deliver minerals and the organisms that protect from disease. You haven't got it, you're not going to have that nutrition in your food. You're not going to have all of those potential protective features, because these organisms control every disease. A fungal disease, is not a deficiency of a fungicide. Your disease, every disease has a nutritional link. The World Health Organization, in a recent quite long-term study called Nutrition and Disease, couldn't find a single disease without a nutritional link. There's a reason for everything, and very commonly it's linked back to this all-important nutrition. So the equation is minerals and microbes in our body, it's minerals and microbes in the soil, and getting those two parts of the equation working. Degenerative disease we talked about the nutrition, we talked about children. Now, we've done the work, we say perhaps, about whether or not these chemical residues are damaging, and we can say that, yeah, a rat can absorb so many parts per million of glyphosate or fungicides like diasane or whatever, and it doesn't die. But no one did this really basic thing of saying, well, what happens over time? What happens to that chemical? Is it actually detoxed with our two-phase detoxification system? What happens? And what happens is something called bioaccumulation. Now, the liver is the principal detox organ. The liver has an amazing capacity to basically detox most natural things, even snake poison. The liver goes to work and has a whole set of mechanisms. It has no mechanisms for most of the man-made chemicals. And so when those chemicals come through, and we're talking about most of the residues on food that didn't kill a hamster with 5 parts per million, but it comes into the human body and the liver says, well, I've never seen this, I've got no mechanism, and it pumps it off as far away as possible from the major organs and stores it in the fat. And it bioaccumulates. That's what bioaccumulation, that's what that study of the children was about bioaccumulation. And all of you who are eating non-organic food have got that same issue. There are tools I'll talk about later. There's the Japanese invention of far-infrared saunas. Now, I had a farmer who's now become quite a famous writer. Some of you might be familiar with his work because he writes sort of philosophical, sort of life-changing books, a guy called Michael Rhodes. Now, Michael was a dairy farmer in Tasmania, and he had a major problem with something called Scotch thistle, and he'd strap on his aluminium, they were horrible old backpack sprayers that very often leaked. Even when you put new seals in, they would leak through the top and so forth. Anyway, he'd go out and spray his Scotch thistles to manage that problem on his farm. Very often it would leak and he would get this chemical 2,4-D. Anyone who knows anything about chemicals will know the very strong smell of 2,4-D. Would leak down his back and he'd get headaches and so forth. Now one day he was vomiting and very sick for about 2 or 3 days and he said, I'm done. And he became Tasmania's first organic dairy farmer. He chose a bad time. The first drought that Tasmania experienced in decades came at that exact time. And you may well have thought, and no doubt he thought at the time, how could I be so unlucky? Because the day that he sold his contract to sell the farm at a greatly reduced price, it rained and continued to rain. So you would have thought, oh my God, how bad was that? He went out, he'd farmed all his life, he went with his children, one of whom is Duncan Rose, the editor of Nexus magazine, some of you may be familiar with, now a worldwide magazine, alternative magazine. But anyway, he went out and he discovered when he had some time to himself, he wasn't working on the land, that he could write sort of inspirational, philosophical, kind of life-changing books, I guess you could call it. He's now got 20 books published in 14 languages. And now Michael was at one of my conferences. I was chatting to him about far-infrared saunas and this really, really impressive technology the Japanese developed. Far less heat than a normal sauna, pumps right into your fat cells and pumps out the chemicals. He said, well, I'm going to get one. So he went and got a 3-man sauna, which you can now buy for about $1,500. And him and his wife Trini and their daughter sit in this 3-man sauna, got the stereo out on the veranda looking at his acreage. 25 minutes, this is 30 years after he gave up farming, 25 minutes into a 40-minute sauna session, Trini and his daughter rushed from the sauna. The stink of 2,4-D is overpowering, and for the next 8 saunas, Trini gave him an old towel and threw it out because she wasn't going to put it in the wash. It stunk so much of 2,4-D. 30 years later, stored in the fat. That's bioaccumulation. That is what our children are experiencing, and that's something we need to do something about. How happy is the planet in 2013? There's no doubts anymore, in my opinion. You sort of have to be a bit of an idiot to argue the cause, having lived in Australia the last few months. The first 7 days of January were in the top 20 hottest days ever on record. January was the hottest month by far ever, an average of 40-something degrees across the country. That's 120 in your language. Massive heat. And then, of course, we had the heat at one end of the country broke, and we had 100-year floods covering one end of the country. So we had one end underwater, and then the other end caught fire. And we've had some of the biggest bushfires in history. If you've still got your head in the sand, that head is in damage of getting damaged by either water or heat. We really have got beyond the point of debating whether or not climate change is happening. There is absolutely no doubt about it. Ice is melting at unprecedented rates. Extreme weather events, we now know it's not just our imagination, it's been quantified. There's been nothing ever like the escalation of those events. The ocean's heating, the ocean's becoming more acidic, and herein lies something you really do need to understand and be aware of. And this is all fairly grim, but it's going to get better. I was travelling down to Tasmania to do a seminar, and an Australian scientist was talking on the radio on our national ABC channel, chatting about the completion of some of his recent research. And what his team had been researching was, see, we're lucky, and many people aren't aware of this, that 30% in the northern oceans and 50% in the southern oceans of all the man-made CO2, all the anthropogenic CO2 has actually been absorbed by the ocean. The Earth's trying to look after itself, trying to balance things out. And it's grabbed all of that. Otherwise, we would have had massive problems in relation to now if that 50% had ended up in the atmosphere that we've made over the last 100 years. And so it's ended up, and what happens when it enters the ocean, of course, it becomes carbonic acid and it acidifies the ocean. So the very simple question that I was amazed that someone hadn't done previously was, when does that start impacting core features of the ocean and the most important building blocks of life on this planet, not just the ocean, because we don't exist without the ocean, understand. The most important building blocks are algae and plankton. And algae and plankton have a calcium-based shell. And the issue with carbonic acid is that conditions are created where life forms with calcium-based shells, coral, all the crustaceans, algae and krill, can no longer build their shells and at some point can no longer exist. So his research said, and you'd wonder, why wouldn't someone have done that sooner, was how long does it before it seriously impacts algae and krill? And really seriously impacts us at that point. Is it 20, 50, 500, 5,000 years? He burst into tears on the radio when he described the outcome of the research where 20 years, it's in your lifetime, not your children's lifetime, the algae and krill are in really, really serious trouble, which means the ocean's in trouble and we are in serious trouble. So it's huge. I was, almost in tears myself in researching this and recognising the unbelievable apathy. I mean, people were up, for the Vietnam War, which is like a tiny speck of nothing in comparison to what we're talking about in this equation. And that's why I'm so pleased to have heard that there's this mass rally planned for tomorrow. They're talking about the largest rally, and I didn't know about that at this point. I mean, I was sitting in a restaurant on Valentine's Day myself, was with 100 couples in this large restaurant on the ocean front in Monterey. With all these couples, I felt like a real wallflower amongst them. But and I hear this Chicago song I hadn't heard. Does anyone know what time of day it is? Does anyone really care? And it drove home exactly what I was thinking at that moment in terms of this apathy. I mean, for God's sake, you've got to. One of the things, if you analyse it sociologically, that's changed from the 60s to now, in terms of the amazing level of apathy in the face of something that, it's the greatest collective denial in the history of mankind, what we're in the midst of. But one of the things that's changed has been sport. This thing, who gives a stuff who won what game? And what are you going to say when you roll up to your children, they say this was your watch when this happened, when the world got ruined? How could you spend? James Hansen. James Hansen is in the top 5 climate change. No one can deny that. He's a NASA scientist, 50 years now of work on climate change. Michael Oppenheimer, who's the author of several climate change, says of James Hansen, his science is impeccable. His prescience is unparalleled. James Hansen hasn't been wrong. James Hansen said we've got 3 years. 3 years until we live in a very different world. Not till the world's gone, but till we live in a very different world that most of us will wish we'd done something about, and everyone's still sitting on their asses watching sport. And so you say, I went to every Lakers game. Well, big fucking deal. You didn't do what you should have done. It's a serious, serious issue. This can't get you up. Nothing's going to die, is all I can say, because it's an insane scenario. So that's algae and krill, 20 years. Our current emphasis has been on emissions restrictions. And that's huge. I'm not suggesting that that's not an important thing, but someone's got to ask the question of what happens if tomorrow morning the entire world recognised the scale of this problem and said, right, we're cutting back 100% emissions. And that was one of the things I discovered in terms of the research in this latest bout of reading papers, was all of these papers coming out termed the irreversibility of climate change. We're locked into 2 to 3 degrees, it appears, and their argument is there's nothing we can do about it. Certainly the emissions restrictions does nothing in the long term. If we look at this, not when I say nothing, it's still important, but basically if we cut back by 100% tomorrow, in 200 years' time we're down to the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere in 1975, which is too much. And the oceans continue to heat and acidify, and no one out there at all will suggest that we've got 200 years left. So that deal doesn't work. Is there a deal that works? Are we locked into some kind of train wreck? No, we're not. There is a solution, and we'll talk about that. The solution involves that 476 gigatons that's in the atmosphere that shouldn't be there, that should have been in the soil. It involves putting it back there. It involves intervening in the carbon cycle, having the organisms in place and the minerals that fire those organisms in place, having the soil fertility there that every person can contribute to. Every person who can conceivably compost can compost. And you composting, which means you're trapping carbon that would otherwise be in the atmosphere, you're intervening in the carbon cycle, your individual contribution as a home composter is actually worth considerably more when you do the sums than turning off your lights and putting on solar panels. Considerably more. It's the single biggest contribution that any individual can make. So currently we're adding 33.5 billion tonnes of CO2, 20% is coming from you guys. 1% increase in farmed land in the US pulls back 4.5 of your 8 gigatons that you're producing. That's more than what's needed to save the day. A 1.6% increase in every piece of cultivated land on the planet actually saves the day. It actually keeps us at 350. You can actually pull back what we've got by putting it back as humus and intervene in that carbon cycle. So it's doable, and we do it on a daily basis, and we need to teach, as I'm frantically trying to do, as many people as possible. Remember, 4 gigatons, you can't see it, but 4 gigatons is 1 part per million. 476 divided by 4, we've got 100 parts per million of carbon that shouldn't be there. Where did it come from? And if we put it back, what happens? Well, we change the day and we save the day. and it's doable, eminently doable, and there is no greater win-win situation than what happens when you put carbon back in the soil. Farmers become profitable. We need to pay farmers carbon credits. We'll talk about those things as we move through. So 350 is considered sustainable. In January this year, 395.55. Currently, we're up 1 degree. And we've seen the changes now. If we recognise James Lovelock's Gaia theory, you have to understand, you think 1 degree, big deal. Well, 1 degree has seen this massive change. 1 degree in your body above your ideal temperature at 98.6 or whatever it is in Fahrenheit. 1 degree changes a whole range of things. There's all sorts of metabolic change, and exactly the same thing is happening on a planetary level. Now, we can live at 1.5, which is not too far off. There's a whole range of changes that kick in. There's going to be a lot of climate change refugees. We're talking about small changes with huge impacts. We can survive, it's considered, really difficultly. It gets hard at 3, but at the moment, with where we're heading, with business as usual, we're heading at 6, and then that's beyond adaptability. I heard a local television channel in Australia just before I left talking about the losses of things like koalas and so forth that were going to be extinct with the predicted rises over the next few decades to 6 degrees. We're all extinct at 6 degrees. Someone needs to say that, and you don't survive at 6 degrees. There is no people, and we need to be aware of that. So, sorry, that was within the 100 years? Yes. So if we look at some tips for how we go about building humus, one of the big things you guys can do is support organic farmers, because they're the only guys out there building humus. Organic farming and all the principles involved in it is exactly what builds humus. Organic or biological agriculture, which is slightly different than organic, a bit more pragmatic, but that's how you build it. So the simple thing you do is that you reward those that are doing the right thing, and organic food becomes a fairly strong prerogative. We need to actually legislate against the farm chemicals that are burning the organisms, particularly microbes and fungi that are so critical. But there are other fungi called cellulose digesting fungi that are really, really knocked out by farm chemicals. The new finding that comes from a guy called Professor Don Huber, who is shaping up as something of a David and Goliath in his battle against Monsanto, as it were. Don Huber has now published a whole string of papers that have been, glyphosate incidentally, Roundup, is the world's largest selling chemical by far. Everyone uses it. It was sold as this biodegradable, safer than safe herbicide, and what Don has showed is that it is anything but. He's now linked 40 different diseases specifically to, so glyphosate then brings about the use of a whole range of other protective chemicals because it actually kills the organisms that otherwise would have controlled that disease, and it ties up some of the key minerals that the plant would have used in its own immune system, because we now understand that plants have an immune system not unlike ours, and you can monitor that immune system and measure the presence of something called phytoalexins, which are equivalent to our antibodies. And those phytoalexins are fueled by a whole range of trace minerals that are shut down by glyphosate. So there's a whole story with the world's largest selling chemicals. We really need to start coming down with some legislation and banning some of the chemicals, and there's a whole range of them. We also need to look at tillage, because tillage is a huge story, and the people that have done the work on how do you build carbon most efficiently has shown it has to be with minimum tillage. You can't be out in the valley out where I'm working with Dole at the moment, where they actually till the soil up to 30 times to prepare it for vegetable planting. Every time you open the soil, the humus oxidizes. Some of it oxidizes. If you do it when it's wet, massive amounts oxidize. I've seen 1%, soil can have 3%, 1% lost in one poor management decision by going out and opening up the soil when it's wet, when you really, really lose humus big time. But every time you open the soil, you lose some humus that oxidizes and goes up as CO2. So tillage, minimum tillage, grazing practices, it's so simple. The most productive areas in the history of mankind were the Great Plains. No area anywhere on the planet has produced more biomass on a regular basis for thousands of years than the Great Plains. And so you say, how did that happen? They didn't have urea. How did they do that? And then you recognise that the role of animals in building fertility, in this case massive herds of buffalo that would come into one area for a day and poo and wee over that whole area, trample the grass, some of it broke off and then converted to humus with all that biological stimulation, created a seed bed and dropped seeds from wherever they were previously and created this massive biodiversity of organic matter in that soil, and then left with a whole bunch of this grass still standing at this level. Because the big thing that you need to understand about grazing, which is the predominant agricultural activity on the planet, is that if you graze down to here, the roots pull themselves up accordingly, and the capacity of that plant to fix carbon in the soil and to deliver carbon is ridiculously compromised. You lost the solar panel that captures the carbon dioxide and sunlight and water and creates the sugar, and you lost the capacity of the roots to distribute that sugar. The roots prune themselves with how much you eat the grass down. It's so simple, and everyone grazes down to a bowling green. And what's been shown is that intensive grazing, rotational cell grazing, which mirrors exactly what the buffalo did, you bring 600 cows into 10 acres for a day, or 10 hectares for 10 acres for a day, and then pull them out of there with a bunch of grass still standing, that builds carbon. Tremendous work in Australia on the carbon building potential of cell grazing in terms of really, really phenomenal. In fact, if and when, and it has to be very soon because we haven't got much time, we introduce carbon credits for farmers. The graziers who understand that system are actually going to do really well in terms of collecting carbon credits for building humus. Composting needs to become the mantra for all growers and all home gardens. I was so thrilled to return to South Africa after 2 years away, and I've always been back every year, and to see this massive change. I got standing ovations at every talk in South Africa this time around. I saw composting on 1 in 5 farms. The South Africans have become, I visited a 90,000 hectare farm where the entire farm, called ZZ2, has become a showpiece, biological showcase, brewing microorganisms, foliar spraying, doing leaf tests, getting the nutrition perfect, putting compost in massive amounts under all of the crops, producing thousands of tonnes of compost a year. I think the largest tomato producers they are in the southern hemisphere, fleets of trucks, huge scale, it's not some little backyarder event, 90,000 hectares, all utilising this hard science biological approach. It can be done really, really easily. We just need to educate people of how it needs to be done, and the importance that we do it as soon as possible. We compost everything at every opportunity. And the finding, and this is an important little finding in terms of compost science, the finding is that if you can put some soil that has a clay base with your compost, and 5 to 10%, the microorganisms that produce the humus, if they can tie that humus into a little clay humus crumb, the humus, instead of lasting for a year in your soil before it oxides and goes back, now you've created what's called stable humus that lasts for 35 years, which is longer than the average of plant mass. The average life of carbon stored in plant mass, corn's 3 months, trees, 100 years, the average time's 10 years. The average time in the soil, if we get it right, is 35 years. So it's something we should have been doing yesterday in terms of paying carbon credits. Mycorrhizal fungi can be reintroduced for as little as $10 a hectare. This is what you sort of see. I don't know if you can see it here. In terms of this amazing sort of filaments that and root hairs that suddenly develop in the presence of mycorrhizal fungi, and your plant does so much better and much, much less likely of disease pressure and so forth, and so much more nutrition delivered. This is what you sort of see. I don't know if you can see it here. In terms of this amazing sort of filaments that and root hairs that suddenly develop in the presence of mycorrhizal fungi, and your plant does so much better and much, much less likely of disease pressure and so forth, and so much more nutrition delivered if you can put these creatures who are making 1/3 of all the humus on the planet. That's my veggie garden here after putting mycorrhizal fungi in the garden. See how important they are. You want to taste what these vegetables taste like. Unbelievable, sweet, memorable flavours. We have to reward the most important profession on the planet. There's no more important profession than growing food. There is nothing more. People don't realise, you don't realise what we're heading towards in terms of food security and where we're heading with a potential financial collapses and so forth, and the importance of food in that context. There's never been anything more important than producing food, and now farmers are the only people that can save the planet, so we do need to support them and get them behind them on every level. We need to fund native people to retain their forests. It's turned out to be a lot more difficult than what we thought. We thought we'd just take them out and replant some new ones. To build an interrelated, fully functioning ecosystem like a rainforest is a hell of a lot harder than we ever thought, and we haven't got time to start from scratch. We've got to value what's there and put immense value on what still remains. So obviously they're going to be paid to justify not selling to the Chinese as they're doing. Honestly, you've got to see Angola at the moment to believe it. Angola's got Chinese logging trucks nose to nose coming out of forests with 300-year-old trees lined on every truck. The Chinese have gone and said, we'll build your roads, we'll build your hospitals, we want your minerals and we want your forests, and they've given it to them. So there's a lot of things need to be done in that context. Inoculums, you can brew up, you can use in large scales 1,000-litre tanks, you can use a 20-litre bucket at home, you can brew up these cellulose digesting fungi that are so responsible for producing this stable long-term humus. They're lacking in every soil, not just mycorrhizal fungi, the other fungi that tie the clay into the humus to create the long-term humus. It costs $10 a hectare to brew them up and put them out there. It's nothing. It's doable. The technology's all there. It's been trial run for decades. We need to get these creatures back in there building humus, and we need to put them back real quick. This is still a really, really popular practice in the sugarcane industry in Australia, although I'm trying to stop it at every step that I can. Everywhere on pastures and all across the country, and of course as we remove rainforests, we burn them, and when we burn them, all of that carbon becomes CO2. It's something that we should have stopped long before now. But certainly, like in a sugarcane, you burn it, it's easy to harvest the cane, but you lost what happens when you see all these little bits of ash. That's the minerals. When you burn something, if you take 100 kilos of plant matter and burn it, you get left with 5 kilos of ash. That 5 kilos of ash is the minerals that grew the crop. And when you burn it, all of those minerals go to your neighbours, or in some cases 20 kilometres down the road. But more importantly, that's the fuel. This fibrous material is what feeds the fungi that make the humus. This should be humus, not CO2 in the atmosphere. And we have to stop them doing that. We have to legislate, we have to fight and push and get off our asses and do things to make that happen. Carbon should be included with all fertilisers. What's that about? Well, part of the loss of 2/3 of humus, this is how it works. Everything on the planet has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So we have a 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. Trees have a 500-to-1. Nematodes in the soil have a 100-to-1. Bacteria have a 5-to-1 carbon ratio. Bacteria are the most numerous creatures in the soil. 5 billion in a teaspoon of good soil. We're talking huge numbers. We're talking about 10 cows per hectare in a really healthy soil of underground livestock in the form of just these single-cell creatures where you get 500,000 on a pinhead, tiny creatures in massive numbers. But bacteria have got a 5-to-1 carbon nitrogen ratio. That means they love nitrogen. That means whatever form of nitrogen you put out there, if you're using urea and the most popular commercial forms of nitrogen, the bacteria go ballistic. This is their food. And they eat the nitrogen, which they're geared to have a huge amount, 17% of their body solid nitrogen. They consume that nitrogen. Now they've got to have some carbon to balance out that tight ratio. And no one thought to put carbon with the fertiliser. And what happens if you don't put carbon with the fertiliser? Any suggestions? They eat the only source of carbon in the soil. They literally eat themselves out of house and home. They eat the humus that they made and which they live in, which sustains them. They eat that because they have to have carbon. You can't not do it. You've got to have carbon to balance out your ratio. So the mismanagement of nitrogen, 1 kilogram excess to what the plant requires of nitrogen burns out 100 kilograms of carbon. Nitrogen mismanagement's been one of the major players in the loss of all that 2/3 of our humus. That took that 470 gigatons and put it up in the atmosphere. We need, very simply to put humus, compost, a material called humates, humic and fulvic acid, natural acids that are produced out of compost and out of brown coal, molasses, any kind of carbon source, becomes essential that you do that. Now this is a wonderful little island in the Pacific, one of the most beautiful, unspoiled places on the planet. And I've done a series of workshops there. This was just a few weeks ago. On the 9th of December, we dug up their lawn, just in terms of this ultimate wellness tool. I taught them how to, mulch, all that we could mulch to create a total covering of mulch except for these 2 pathways. We limed the soil, we put some compost in the soil that we pre-made, we put the appropriate minerals, we brewed up some microorganisms, put them there, we planted out the seedlings, shouted them the seedlings and the seeds, and 1 month later, that's the garden. That's exactly, this is the 9th of the 12th, this is the 9th of the 1st when I was over in Norfolk for holidays. I've got a farm over there, I love the place, and this is just a workshop. Everything edible, a kilo, that's 2.2 pounds of every bush bean plant. And just the sweetest, most delicious things you've ever eaten. So she's making all the green smoothies and eating out of that garden 1 month later. So it's not a long-term thing for you to do this. Not a long-term thing at all. So, as I said, the ultimate win-win is building humus. humus is the key to nutrient density, and nutrient density is the key to improving human health, which is much needed. Humus, as we pointed out from that National Bank survey, is the absolute key to farm profitability. Humus holds its own weight in water. How much does it hold? Build 1%, and this is about your role, because water is going to be things that wars, in fact there are wars being fought currently over water. Water is the most precious substance. Only 3% of the water on the planet is fresh, and 90% of that's used for irrigation. Water in this climate change scenario is just going to become insanely important in the whole scheme of food production, as it is already. Now, you build 1% organic matter in your soil because you start composting things and doing whatever you can do, or you encourage people who are on a larger scale to do that same thing and take this message out there. You build 1%, your soil now holds 170,000 litres more than what it could have held before. 1% is 170,000 litres per hectare, not per acre. But if you do that down to a square metre, because there's 10,000 square metres in a square metres, you don't talk metres, but anyway, it's an area about this size that I'm standing in. That now holds 17 litres, a couple of bucketfuls of water that it couldn't hold before. So, and instead of that water being stored in great big dams that evaporate at massive rates with a huge carbon footprint with pumps pumping it, and then again as you put it through your centre pivot and you lose a whole lot of water and you've got a carbon footprint printing it out, right next to the plant, the sun can't dehydrate it, can't evaporate it. The plant takes it as it needs it right next to its roots. You don't get a better water storage system, and that's just one of the multiple roles that this humus has. So you pay people to do that, you've got this huge, huge payback for water efficiency, for our health, for farm profitability. As a carbon filter, our soils are filled with toxins. Do the analysis, do the in-depth analysis as we do. There's a bunch of toxins. How do you take chlorine out of water? So, and you shouldn't be drinking. Understand you've got 100 trillion organisms. Why would you drink chlorinated water? Obviously, it's going to impact those 100 trillion organisms. You wouldn't even consider it. So what do you run it through a carbon filter. And what is humus? Humus is a carbon filter. It's an amazing filter to pull out those. The higher your humus levels, the less likelihood of chemical contamination of the food that you're eating, because it all gets isolated by the carbon. So it's a hugely important thing from that perspective. The other huge issue in agriculture and our mismanagement of nitrogen is that there are two forms of nitrogen. One of them, called nitrate nitrogen, I'll just describe this in a little more depth. There are two forms of storage system in the soils, otherwise nutrients would run straight through it. There's what's called the clay colloid, which just means a little particle of clay, and clay has negatively charged sites on it, like little magnets, that attracts positively charged minerals called cations. So these include things like calcium and magnesium and potassium and so forth, stick on the clay, and that's how they stay in the soil. Now, humus is the only thing in the soil that has positively charged sites that can hold a negatively charged minerals called anions and stop them from leaching. And the principal anion that we're concerned about is nitrate nitrogen. Now, nitrate nitrogen is, there are over 200 published papers linking nitrate nitrogen to cancer. How? Well, Professor Otto Warburg won his Nobel Prize for describing how and why. He won his Nobel Prize for discovering the root cause of cancer, and the root cause of cancer is called anaerobism. And it's a condition often linked to acidity where the blood becomes incapable of carrying enough oxygen to all of the cells. And Otto theorised, and it's gone beyond theory now, is that some of the cells actually break away in the body's infinite capacity to adapt. There are cells that aren't getting enough oxygen, so some of them break away and they actually take in CO2 and release oxygen. They become a plant cell for all intents and purposes. And you might say, well, where do they get the CO2 from? They get it from sugar, the fermentation of sugar, and that's why sugar feeds cancer, and why, if you've got cancer, the very, very first thing you do is cut out all forms of sugar, because sugar feeds it through that very process, through that fermentation of sugar to produce CO2 that those cells live on. And ironically, in final stage cancer, when you end up in hospital, they put you on a glucose drip, and that really is euthanasia at that point. Not that anyone says it. So, humus is the only thing with the positive sites that holds nitrates. So the more humus we get, because we pay farmers carbon credits, the more of those nitrates that have flooded all of our waterways. Look at the figures on your drinking water. There is no water that you can get in America that's not nitrate contaminated. It's just a level of how much. And the reason for that is there's no humus that would otherwise hold on to it in the soil. So we put the humus back, we hold the nitrates. I'm just trying to explain the win-win scenario here. And humus is the glue. This is Brisbane. This is the Brisbane River in one of its 300-year floods that we've had in 4 years. 3 out of 4 years it's flooded. Brown water. Humus is the glue that holds the soil together. The water runs brown when you've lost the humus. And so in this instance, we had the whole eastern seaboard covered in red dust. just a massive dust storm that covered 5,000 kilometres of Australia's, 7,000 kilometres, 6,000 kilometres of Australia's coastline. That dust storm is about the loss of humus that holds that soil together. Humus is the glue that holds everything. You lose it, you have dust storms, you have brown topsoil, and we've got this fragile layer of topsoil that covers the planet that produces the very food we eat that we're losing at a tremendous rate because we lost the humus that holds the thing together. So when we take carbon from the atmosphere, return it to the soil as humus, our productivity increases, we boost water use efficiency, we reduce pest and disease pressure, our soils produce more nutrient-dense produce for everyone and for the health of us all. And those healthy soils create hardy people and a happy planet. So that's my TED presentation, just running it through, and it went a hell of a lot over 18 minutes. so I've got to tighten that up somewhat. So how do we create healthy soils? Now this is the stuff that I'll flick by sides. I'll pick out little bits that I think that you can relate to. Because you're not gardeners and there's going to be foreign language to you in some instances, but it'll give you some kind of feel, and then we'll get on to some human health stuff and stuff that you can all relate to. So what we do within the company is we have these things called soil therapy and plant therapy. We've developed a whole mineral balancing approach that governs microbial activity. You get the minerals right, the microbes all kick in, and we've shown this whole mineral microbe link. We do leaf tests and we correct whatever's deficient with foliar sprays on the leaf. We've found that if you can get 4 minerals at high levels on the leaf, then you've got this incredibly resilient plant that doesn't need chemical intervention, and I think we're the first to have discovered that. It turns out that these 4 minerals are the actual 4 most important minerals for the most important process, photosynthesis. And so we get them right on a leaf analysis, and your disease pressure and insect pressure decreases dramatically and your nutrient density improves hugely. But of course the microbes are the other half of the equation, as we mentioned. You know, extractive agriculture has been a harsh mistress. Now that we do a lot of more soil life counts all over the world, there's universities doing it, we're finding that we've knocked the hell out of these creatures. Compost and inoculums and biostimulants got a huge play. Compost, as we said, is the soil equivalent to fermented food. So fermented food is one of the greatest things you can do for your own health. You know, the simple concept of eating things like yogurt and eating things like sauerkraut and so forth are amazingly effective wellness tools. It's very, very simple to make and unbelievably effective in terms of boosting up your immune system, because that's what you're doing. Hugely important. And compost is the same story in the soil, basically. Your compost is 30%, 32% humus. You're adding it, but more than the humus you're adding is the fact that it stimulates all the organisms, particularly microbes and fungi, that make humus. So it's a real triggering mechanism. And a lot of people thought, well, it's just too hard. It is not hard to do at all. We teach, even in our home courses, we teach this very simple level. It's called the carbon to nitrogen ratio. The carbon's the brown stuff, the nitrogen's the green stuff. The green is, nitrogen's the major mineral in that green pigment called chlorophyll, and as it turns brown, the nitrogen gases off as nitrous oxide and becomes part of that thick blanket that's causing the problem. And so what you do is just have a green layer and a brown layer, and you might have a freestanding pile, and you put down your one layer so deep, you sprinkle some lime on it, you sprinkle some previous compost if you can get your hands on some, you put your green layer, you sprinkle your lime, and you water each layer in so that it's nice and moist. You build your pile up to so big, your freestanding pile, you cover it with some wet sacks or whatever so it can still breathe. It's the easiest thing in the world. You can add nutrients into that pile as you go if you want to add some minerals and so forth in there. Anyone can compost, so we teach people all the time at a home level and on a huge scale, hundreds of tonnes commercial level. Well, we talked about the soil. Basically, we're chasing a 5% minimum. The higher, the better. We're chasing a whole range of ratios. We're talking about this new understanding of this amazing life beneath our feet, this key to what's called the soil food web, this interrelated community of crazy, amazing organisms, most of which you can't see. It's an invisible world. The one creature you can see that's hugely important and which is lacking in almost every agriculture soil you're looking at is called the earthworm, the humble earthworm. We'll talk about how important that creature is. This creature is massively important in terms of aerating the soil, drilling those burrows and creating aeration to feed it to aeration. All the key organisms, aerobic organisms that need that oxygen, and the earthworm provides it in the form of those burrows. It shreds up organic matter, it aggregates soil particles, it makes a whole group of organisms that it incubates that are totally unique to the earthworm. No, you can't get them anywhere else. They're created and incubated in the earthworm's guts. The earthworm has no enzymes to break down all of that stuff it eats. these microorganisms do all that work, and every bit of poo is jam-packed with those really unique and amazingly productive microorganisms that only come from Earth. If you haven't got earthworms, you haven't got those creatures, and you've missed a whole bunch of potential in terms of crop health and so forth. The poo that comes out the back end, this little intestine, which is effectively what it is in the soil, this little intestine is a fertiliser machine. What comes out the tail end is mind-boggling. It's 7 times more phosphorus in the people. It's actually not explained quite how that can be, but 7 times more phosphorus, 10 times more potassium, 5 times more nitrogen, 3 times more magnesium, 1.5 times more calcium. A fertiliser machine. The more earthworms you've got, the more poo they produce. In fact, if we want to get down to figures, if you can get 25 earthworms per shovel in your home garden or obviously on your farm, those 25 earthworms per shovel produce 300 tonnes of earthworm castings. Now, you buy earthworm castings, well, I'm saying $100, which makes $30,000, but they are a lot more expensive than $100 a tonne. They are hundreds of dollars a tonne. But even at $100 a tonne, that's $30,000. You don't need anything else. You don't need petrochemicals in agriculture at that point. And what we need to understand in terms of a system, because it's not just climate change that's impacting us and agriculture. Agriculture is equally impacted by the spectre of peak oil. Now, the thing you need to understand about peak oil is that in the history of non-renewable resources, we're talking about 2 things impacting us at one time. It's like the perfect storm. In the history of non-renewable resources, whenever, and of course there's been many that have come before this, come and gone before this, but whenever a non-renewable resources, when at least half of the so-called experts have said, yeah, the first half's gone, from there on the price goes like this. There's never been a dip. There's not the dips where you drop down again to so much a barrel or whatever, we're talking oil. There's never been a dip in the second half in the history of economics. So that's what we can expect in the 3 to 5 years when we're expected to reach peak oil. And how does that impact our food producers? Well, everything in agriculture is petrochemical. The fungicides, pesticides, herbicides, nematicides, DAP, MAP, urea, diesel, the whole shooting box is petrochemical driven. And how good is it if they can actually reduce their reliance and realise how to work with nature, and nature looks after you, and understand that it can be done, and there's a lot of science now behind it, and they all thought it was a bunch of hippie bullshit, and they realise it's not now. And we need to drive that home as much as we can possibly drive it home. So we won't go through all of the creatures and talk about them at this point. This is just talking about, if you do have a home garden, real simple things you can do. You can just buy a little $2 pack of pH strips and take a little bit of deionised water, which is the water you buy from the supermarket for a couple of dollars to put in your iron, and mix half water and half soil, half deionised water and half soil, and dip in your pH strip, and what you're chasing is a pH of 6.4. And this is why this is so important, because what you're trying to grow is nutrient density. You're trying to grow medicine for yourself and your family. And this is how important this very simple thing of pH is. The width of the bar is linked to, and you can't see it down here unfortunately, because I don't know why the slides have come out like this, but down here is the pH from whatever, and 6.4 is here, and 6.4 is the figure where everything is most available. I think it's just, I can't see there, but anyway, wherever the bar is widest across the line, which is somewhere about here, is 6.4. And, oh, there we go, great. So yeah, 6.4 is here. And that's the ideal pH, and that's what you chase in your soil. Often you have to lime. Calcium is the most important of all minerals, and you need to get it up to that 6.4. If you're down here like a lot of home gardeners, you're missing all of these things where the line is thin. This is uptake. This is the nutrients that are going to do your wellness, your ongoing wellness. Or if you're too alkaline, it's the same story. So a very simple thing that anyone can do is to correct their soil pH. A healthy soil, there's really, really annoying things that you just, from a soil science perspective, and this is a little bit more than what you probably want to hear, but I'll just tell this one thing and I'll move on to some other things. There's a little trace mineral called molybdenum. You only need 0.5 of a part per million of molybdenum in your soil, and molybdenum does 2 things. The first thing that molybdenum does is allow you access to the free gift of nitrogen that hovers above every hectare. Now, above every hectare, because nitrogen is the most predominant gas in the atmosphere, above every hectare is 74,000 tonnes of nitrogen gas. Huge amounts of nitrogen for the taking. Because you might say, how did the Great Plains produce the most biomass? And nitrogen's the most abundant mineral in the plant. Where did they get the nitrogen from? So they got it from where they were supposed to get it from. They got it from the atmosphere, 74,000 tonnes for the taking. But how do you harvest it from the atmosphere? You've got to have what are called nitrogen-fixing organisms. Some of them live in the little nodules on legumes and harvest nitrogen from the atmosphere and convert it into ammonium nitrogen in the soil. And some of them, equal numbers, are called free-living nitrogen fixers who hover around the plant roots waiting for their daily feed of sugar and receive and give back nitrogen that they fix from the atmosphere to look after their host so they get more sugar and can provide more nitrogen. Now, that deal of harvesting that gas and turning it into ammonium nitrogen is driven by an enzyme, and the enzyme's called nitrogenase, and nitrogenase has two minerals without which you can't make nitrogenase, and those two minerals are iron, which is the most abundant mineral on the planet and not usually a problem, iron and molybdenum. Every soil test we look at is molybdenum deficient. Why didn't anyone tell anyone that? You're not going to rely on the stuff in a bag if you can get the stuff for free, but you can't do that without 2 cups of sodium molybdate in your soil, and that's all that's required in many cases. Tiny amounts to correct a problem that's beyond my comprehension why no one did anything about it. That's the first stage. The second stage of the requirement for this little trace mineral that's missing in most soils that we analyse relates to what happens to nitrogen when it hits the plant. Well, the nitrate form of nitrogen, the kind that we don't want too much of in the scheme of things, ends up in the leaf. And that form of nitrogen then has to become, hopefully before animals or we eat it, needs to be converted to proteins. We don't want to eat nitrates, they're carcinogens. I'll just digress for a second here. There's one issue here in terms of food that you should be very aware of in your consumption, and that relates to hydroponic food. Hydroponic food only uses one form of nitrogen. Because of the two-part mix that's required in hydroponics, and most of the lettuces you're buying in supermarkets come from hydroponics these days. Hydroponics uses calcium nitrate and potassium nitrate, only nitrates. Now the makeup of a plant should be 75% ammonium, 25% nitrate. Analyse hydroponic food and it's all nitrates, and you can taste that little bitterness. The bitterness, if you're eating carrots, conventional carrots, not organic carrots, and you taste that bitter aftertaste, don't juice those carrots. That bitterness is the taste of nitrates, and nitrates are carcinogens. And being a vegetarian in that context, if you're not eating organically, you're going to be in trouble. You're eating a carcinogen in large amounts. So hydroponic food is garbage food. Nitrates are taken up into the plant with water, and that dilutes everything else in the plant. Now there's a little tool called a refractometer where you squeeze some juice, the light refracts through the dissolved solids, and we use it as a principal tool to monitor how good you're doing at growing and how much nutrient density you're producing in the produce. The Brix level, as it's called, is what you're measuring. You're measuring nutrient density, you're measuring dissolved solids. Should be 12 for lettuces or higher. The higher the better. We've never found a hydroponic lettuce anywhere on the planet with a Brix level higher than 1.5 degrees Brix. It is garbage food that you should never have entering your mouth. Now, there's an exception to that system of growing, and that involves something called aquaponics. And aquaponics is just the absolute bee's knees, because aquaponics is all the poo in the ammonium form delivering that perfect balance of the ammonium form of nitrogen in the plant. Yes?
So sorry, but is it mostly just lettuce, or kind of feels like a what?
We're talking about everything that's grown hydroponically, which is cucumbers. Most cucumbers in the shop are grown hydroponically now. Lettuce, not all of them. Tomatoes on a huge scale now.
Everything hydroponically.
Yeah. There's a lot. Yeah, all hydroponic food's garbage. Yes.
How do you find out if they're hydroponic?
Well, yeah, you can guess in terms of. Yeah, go to the farmers market. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. So basically, what we want to do is convert those nitrates through to proteins. And herein we have another enzyme, and the enzyme's called the nitrate reductase enzyme. Now, the nitrate reductase enzyme is made of this little trace mineral that's missing everywhere, molybdenum. If you haven't got molybdenum, you can't convert nitrates, the carcinogen, into proteins, the good food for animals or humans, just for the sake of a couple of cups of molybdenum. So we need to know these things. Certainly the farmers need to know this stuff. Now, this is a study in New Zealand. This is a little obscure trace mineral. This is 1 cup of sodium molybdenum added to a superphosphate fertiliser. Those were the yield increases. Don't let you think that this is... The smallest yield increase was 44%. The largest was 603% from 1 cup of a tiny little trace mineral called sodium molybdate. So important. Okay, healthy soils should be self-protective, and one of the ways that you can make them self-protective is this relatively new technology called making compost tea. Easiest thing in the world to do. You take a couple of handfuls of compost if you're a home gardener, you put it in a 20-litre bucket or a 10-litre bucket of water, you add some food that might involve something like fish and kelp and a little bit of sugar, and for 24 hours you brew that, and what you've done is take this little handful of compost with its 5 billion organisms per teaspoon, and that inoculum has been bred out like making beer, and now you've got a 20 litre bucket for it that costs you 10 cents. And you take that 20 litre bucket, put it in a watering can, and reintroduce that broad spectrum of organisms throughout your soil. It's a really neat concept, and it works really, really well. The other mineral that's been forgotten about, and for good reason. I mean, silica is the second most abundant mineral on the planet. Iron's the most abundant, silica's second. Soils are aluminosilicate, clays are aluminosilicate. Soils are filled with sands that are silicate-based. But something happened in the chemical experiment, as I call conventional agriculture, that stopped the release of silica, which the soluble form of silica that plants can access is called silicic acid, monosilicic acid. When we test soils, and we're one of the first companies that's begun doing that on a large scale, you need 100 parts per million to have enough silica in the equation. Every soil you test has got 20, 30 parts per million. It's miles off. And what does that mean? What does silica do? Silica governs cell strength. You want to be proactive about not using chemicals. You've got to build the strength of that cell. A fungal hyphae, a fungal disease organism, has got to drill through that substantial cell wall to get to the yolk in the centre, and then it can start draining that food and fueling cell division, and your powdery mildew or downy mildew or whatever your diseases can spread. Your obvious proactive step is, how do I build that cell wall? How do I strengthen that cell wall to buckle the hyphae when he tries to get in there? 2 minerals do that. The 2 minerals that govern the hardest part on your body, your enamel on your teeth, is calcium silicate. And that's what you should be taking, calcium silicate tablets rather than fluoride to strengthen your teeth. Amazingly more effective than fluoride ever was without the side effects. Yes?
You mentioned diatomaceous earth.
And it's not there, so we can change that. We can put silica back into that equation. The Japanese, who have been more proactive than any other people, rice is the highest source of silica. Now, the largest, this is an interesting little aside as I tend to do often, the largest selling product in Europe last year was a product called Stabilization gel, where it's really actually just a quartz, the quartz crystals that are pure silica that has been micronized down to 0.1, I think, of a micron and put into a jelly, and you have your tablespoon a day. The reason it sold 2-point-something billion euros in a single year was nothing to do with what silica does to your internal artery strength, and it does a huge amount in that sense, and most of us, if it's not in the soil, do actually need it. The reason was because silica gives you this beautiful hair. About a month later, you've got this beautiful hair, beautiful nails, and beautiful skin, because all of those are silica-based. And so it's vanity that sold $2 billion worth of siliceous earth, but it's a good handy thing to know because it does work really well. So silica we've got to bring back into the equation. We need to bring, so here's the mycorrhizal fungi, here's the original root. That yellow thing, if you can see it, that's the extension. Understand what that means to have that joined onto your roots. All of these little extensions, mining minerals in the soil and taking them back to the plant. They've drilled into that plant root. The plant's feeding them, and in return there's this massive suite of benefits that they're given in return. Root knot nematodes that usually drill into the root can't get through this network, and the network spews out a whole bunch of biochemicals to dissuade the nematode. Very, very unusual to get diseases when you've got really good mycorrhizal colonisation on your crop. And as we mentioned, all of these little strands producing glomalin, the sticky substance that's responsible for 1/3 of the substance that will save the planet. So there's nothing more important. This is more important than you, that creature. Far more important than we are as organisms at this point on the planet. So get to know it, understand what it does and how important it is. They do much more than build humus. They allow us access to a lot of immobile minerals. They supply calcium, which is calcium's the other cell strength. The hardest thing when you're doing leaf analysis to get luxury levels into the plant in modern agriculture is calcium. Why? Because there's no mycorrhizal fungi delivering calcium to the plant. As soon as you put them in, suddenly the calcium comes in. You've got the cell strength, so you don't have the disease issues. You buckle that hyphae. The insects. In cell walls that are strengthened with calcium and silica, the insects, you can see photos of insects at the International Silica Conference with their whole mandibles worn away by trying to eat a silica-strengthened plant. They look like an old man who's pulled out his teeth because that's what it does for insects when you strengthen the cell. So it's insects and disease if you can get silica and calcium into that cell wall. That's proactive disease resistance. That's just our product called Platform. We've talked about the inherent unsustainability of what we have done is throw more poisons every year at the problem, and every year we've had more pest and disease pressure. Hiding into nothing, the definition of unsustainable. Reasons why the tide's turning. There's some really neat things that are happening. One of them is farmers markets. Farmers markets are like an amazing tool to sort out the wheat from the chaff, because you can go there and you find someone who grows well and grows good produce, and those people get great lineups. And those people are the people who know how to grow food with fertility and with nutrient density. And so, there's this movement in Japan when I was there the year before last called kelso, and kelso means putting a face to your food. So there's a whole chain of supermarkets that are based upon a direct relationship between the consumer and the grower, and there's no middleman that's taking all the profit. And instead of mixing all your food with everyone else's food, you have your food, and it might be 10 different things or 20 things that you grow on 2 or 3 tables, and you've got your photo and your workers or your family, you've got your story, and if you're not delivering, you're not going to be there in 2 weeks because no one buys your stuff. So it just sorts the weed out from the chaff instantly. It's like the best deal ever. I got the largest organic store on the Sunshine Coast to adopt that concept. And so they put the big photo up and they showed whose it was, and they only lasted 2 weeks because the organic is so patchy. There is so much organic by neglect where they simply they think I put on a bit of compost, the job's done. It's not done. You're allowed to apply the missing minerals in organics. You're just a little bit naive and you're not producing very good food in many cases. And what happened was the good growers, incidentally all of whom were working with us, they got swamped out. People said, when's John's Jukes, the tomato grower from Bundaberg, when his stuff coming in? We want that stuff. And no one else's stuff was selling. They just sold out the shelves of the guys who they knew were good. And so, now they mix it all back together again. It's hit and miss because otherwise they don't sell the rest of it. So it works real good if we got the supermarkets to do that here, as they've done in Japan. That sorts out the rubbish. And you have to grow well or you don't sell. And you have to be honest, because where's your sense of responsibility when you can send your gear off and it gets chucked with everyone else? If you have to leave some residues, you sprayed, you didn't do the 4-day, who cares? There's no face to your food. As soon as the face goes on it, you're responsible for the people eating your food. It changes the equation. It's a really neat story, a neat thing to do. It matters how we grow our food. It's all right to say, okay, the concept, let your food be your medicine be your food, and now we're discovering that is so ridiculously true. We're discovering compounds like lycopene and sulforaphane and these incredible anti-cancer compounds and their presence in food, but no one's told you, and you do need to know that just because a tomato has lycopene doesn't mean that all tomatoes have the same level of lycopene. Just because a blueberry has anthocyanins doesn't mean they've all got the same. It depends on how they were grown. If they're grown in a live, active, biologically active soil, and the principal role of microorganisms is to deliver minerals to the food, look at this study from the UK. Yes, surely an orange is going to give you some vitamin C. They found oranges with no vitamin C per 100 milligrams, 0. You just throw a bit of urea on and do what many citrus growers are doing, you don't have those key nutrients. It's all about how the food's grown. So you understand if we start paying farmers for humus, and humus governs everything in that relationship, how it changes the equation for food for us. The message is that we can't sit around and watch sport. We do have to get up and do something about it. Each and every one of us can force the issue. This protest tomorrow needs to spread worldwide. We just got to do something really quickly. And we look at the decline in nutrition in our food. We see Anne-Marie Meyer's book, and you see the figures. We won't go through them all, and there's been many, many studies that have quantified this decline in mineralisation in our food over the last decades. And then there's, of course, how we transport our food, and we see things, for example, that spinach stored at room temperature loses between 50 and 90% within the first day, which is, of course, you always get food older than a day long when you're buying it from the supermarket. We see things like fresh peas losing 50% within a week, and very often you've had more than a week, and so forth. Huge losses, and of course the whole issue of how far we're transporting our food. So this return to farmers markets, to local food, seasonal and so forth, is a hugely important and necessary thing and part of that whole equation. Air transport of 200 grams of Chilean grapes generates the same as leaving a light bulb on for the weekend, just to give you a little bit of an idea. One solution, as I said, grow your own food. What I suggest people in Australia often say, well, look, everyone is so time-starved. Pay your children to grow the food. Get the market prices and actually test your soil and correct it all so it becomes something easy for them to do that's rewarding for them. Pay them for the vegetables at market rates. There's no greater gift from a parent to a child than to encourage that love of the soil. It's the greatest thing you can give your child. To actually, and of course they develop entrepreneurial skills. They look at that row of carrots and say, "Oh my God, that looks like about 40 kilos, and I'm going to get $3 a kilo," and that's good. You need to have entrepreneurial skills. The world is based on entrepreneurial skills. Children discover a love and appreciation of nature. They get, and the sacred production of food. Food's always been a sacred thing. You know, the consuming of food has always been a sacred thing until now. You know, there's nothing sacred about swigging on your thick shake and your Big Mac as you're driving down the phone with your mobile phone to the other ear. You know, this is cafe gratitude. This is saying grace and appreciating where your food comes from and that you're lucky enough to be eating it and eating it with the people you're eating with and so forth. That very simple law of the universe, gratitude, huge, fantastic name, fantastic concept, and a wonderful job you're doing. We need you in Australia yesterday. And of course the exercise and fresh air gets them off the bums playing the computer games. And so one of the things we developed in the home garden was this thing called the Life Force Vitality System. You do these very simple things. It's gardening for dummies, but you can produce this kind of food. And amazing tasting food and absolutely wonderful. Just really high brix levels. Lettuces with 18 brix, they're just mind-boggling taste. So we'll talk about remineralising now for humans. We'll talk about countering the abuse. We talked about food processing and 90% of the bread being white bread and 80 it was actually 80, I said 85, 80% of the nutrition removed. We've now got what is technically called an anti-nutrient, taking more than what you just put in. We talked about the fact that we've lost 80% of our nutrition in 3 generations. We talked about the plague of degenerative diseases, and we talked about the World Health Organization showing they couldn't find a disease without a link. Cravings for salt and sugar, for example, which are the basis of the junk food industry, are linked directly to our need to remineralise. Why? Because salts in their original rock or mountain salt form or sea salt form were that perfect spectrum of 74 minerals in the perfect balance. Seawater is that perfect balance. There's some very, very good longevity studies showing that swimming in the ocean on a daily basis for half an hour is about 10 to 12 years increase in your lifespan because you're absorbing half a cup an hour of seawater with the perfect mineral balance. The perfect mineral balance that very first cell contained that all of our cells require. And so we've got this craving for salt, but then we took salt. I mean, there is nothing that exemplifies the bastardisation of food and the process of food processing more, in my opinion, than salt. You know, we've taken this perfect food, which it is, and I mean salt, there were empires built on salt. The word celery comes from being paid in salt. And we've taken this food with that perfect spectrum that the human body can't actually exist without, and we stripped all those minerals out of it and just left sodium and chloride. And then we said, gee, it doesn't pour too good, let's put an anti-caking agent, and we chose to add aluminium to our table salt. Now, we talked about 1 in 4 people over 65 now getting Alzheimer's, the great new plague disease. When you look at the research, and you can all do that, everyone can check the research for themselves, there are multiple links to Alzheimer's and suggestions and theories in relation to it. By far, mercury is involved in your amalgams are involved to some degree, but the biggest thing by far is aluminium. There is no doubts at all about the link between aluminium and Alzheimer's. And more recently, fluoride has been discovered to be a trigger for aluminium to do its dirty work. Now, we think about our morning routine. I'll just come back when I finish this line. We think about our morning routine that applies to the vast majority of us. We go into the bathroom, we grab our underarm deodorant. There is only one thing, and you need to know this, there's only one thing that can stop you sweating. There's nothing known to mankind except aluminium that shuts down your sweat glands. Now, you might have gone to the markets and bought one of these little rock mineral crystals that you put water on and it stops your sweating. You beauty, it's a natural form, a soluble form of aluminium sulfate. There is only aluminium that'll do it. And there's no part of your body that's more absorbent than directly under your arms, right next to your breast if you're a woman. And so you take your aluminium and you put it on both sides in significant amounts, and then you take your fluoridated toothpaste, you've got the recipe. At least you won't remember how you got Alzheimer's. It's one question, yes.
Can you tell the story about Norfolk and the boron to really get the connection between soil?
Well, one of the fascinating things, thank you. One of the fascinating things about this this concept between what we eat, we are what we eat, and what you eat comes from the soil. One of the most dramatic examples is there's this beautiful little piece of paradise in the Pacific called Norfolk Island. Now, Norfolk Island, the Norfolk Islanders, and there's only 1,700 of them, only eat food that they've grown themselves. They're not allowed to import anything except potatoes and onions. So all of their other fresh food is grown locally. So there's no better little microcosm experiment of how soil can impact the people eating that food. And so the government got us to test all of the food producing soils, and they actually paid for us on our labs and so forth to test them. And we discovered that Norfolk had about 4 or 5 minerals that were lacking. One of those minerals was lacking in every soil was boron. Now, there are actually several problems associated with boron, but by far the most dramatic of those is a far higher incidence of arthritis. Boron deficient soils, there's always a higher level of arthritis in those regions. Now, that's the principal problem that most people have got on Norfolk, and we can actually link, I do a whole presentation for the Norfolk people on what it's meant to them to have those 4 or 5 minerals lacking, and they can see it in all their neighbours. So those problems are about what we eat and what's in our soil. And that's what I'm saying. You've got your own home garden that's mineralised, and you're eating all of that perfect speech. Nothing is more bioavailable than plant colloidal minerals, the minerals that come from plants. Nothing. It's 98% bioavailability. You eat minerals, no matter how well collated they are from the health food store, you know, the availability ranges from 20 to about 40%, 98% from plants. That's where we were supposed to get it from. We weren't supposed to get it off the shop wall. We were supposed to get it from the soil and from plants.